I've been part of AAWAA on and off for the last, 18, 20 years, something like that. So I think it's fantastic that AAWAA is celebrating 30 years. So before I get started, I'd like to make a small correction. Cynthia mentioned that the article written by Laura is the only one. That's not the case. I published an article called Searching for Catalyst and Empowerment, the Asian American Women Artists Association, 1989 to the present, and it was published by Routledge Press in the book Entering the Picture, UV Chicago, the Fresno Feminist Art Program, and the Collective Visions of Women Artists. I believe it was published 10 years ago, so just for the record. Okay. Now, the panel that I organized is formed by artists, and artists from different disciplines at different stages in their careers, and I posed to them several questions, and some of them were questions that were formulated by the artists themselves. The questions, I'll refer to them later. The panelists, as you see, first Sida will talk, and then Claudine, Isabel, Cindy, and Chelsea. So the questions that I formulated, and then other artists add more questions, are the following. Do gender and race matter in the art world? If so, how have you overcome these obstacles? From what have you learned as an Asian American woman artist? What would you advise to those who are starting their careers as artists? How do you view your contribution as an Asian American into the current racial and political discourse? And finally, do you feel a responsibility to the broader Asian American community in the work that you do? So those are the questions that they are going to address our panelists. So the first person to introduce her work is Sita.
Hello, everyone. Okay. All right. Sorry. I have an academic background, and I have the privilege of teaching with Lydia at CCA, and probably actually a few more than I'm forgetting, but as an artist, gonna off-road a little. Okay. I speak better with images, so I am gonna stay within my time, and also just want to interweave some of the images along with the questions today. I am an artist. I was born and raised in Los Angeles on Tongva land, and have made my home here on Ohlone land. Thank you so much for the acknowledgement, Tomie, wherever you are sitting. There you are. And for the past about 15 years, I'm an artist, an educator, and also the co-founder of the People's Kitchen Collective, which I'll talk a little bit more about today. And I've also been working on a book project that is going to be out, fingers crossed, everything with Kaya Press next year, and it really actually taps into all the questions that Lydia has asked. So I guess I will give you like the thumbs up. Yeah, for the first slide. So I wanted to start out actually with this slide, thinking about gender and the art world. This is a photograph of my two grandmothers and my mother. So it's Irma Hatsuka Kuratomi de Kuratomi, who went from Japan to Colombia in 1929. My grandmother from West Bengal, Lalita Bhomik, and my mom, Alisa Kuratomi Bhomik. And my mother moved here in 1969 from Colombia to study art. It was actually the official reason she gave on her visa application that she needed entry into the United States. It was a course of study that was not available in her country of origin. So she arrived in 1969, and I had this moment of crisis actually at an artist residency where I looked at this picture and I said, I cannot imagine producing anything more meaningful than this picture. And I had an advisor ask me, if your studio was on fire, what would you take with you? And I could not think of a single thing that I had made. So I thought, then why the fuck am I an artist? Sorry. Like really, like what am I doing? What am I doing my time? Why not be a scholar? Why not be an archivist? Why not do all these other things? And so I really became a turning point, unconsciously at the time, but a turning point in my practice. And what I started creating was realizing that I was actually creating these families, if you will, these groups of working together, working collaboratively, intersectionally, in the way that our powers, our privileges, our traumas interlock with one another, and think about how we can actually work and address those at those intersections. So this is actually something that I've learned, and in terms of the second question that Lydia asked, in terms of things that I have learned, I think one of the unfortunate things that I learned as an Asian American woman was to think safe, and to think small, and to think practical, and to think with all the risks in mind, and always to be able to predict the things that were dangerous, that were coming around the corner, that could shut me down. And what I started realizing, actually, as I started working in collective, is that I was limiting myself in what I thought was possible. And so that's one thing that this kind of sense of larger belonging really, and the sense also of possibility that comes from working with others started to kind of open me up to. So this is a project that was created just before the 2016 election. It's called Estamos contra el muro, or We're Against the Wall. Along with the folks you just saw on the previous slide, we all came together to basically create a piñata in the shape of a border and then smash it. There's KQED produced a video about it, and I highly encourage watching it. It's a short 3-minute video you can watch on your own. So this is the closing ceremony. Of course, this was days before the 2016 presidential election. And from, one of the things that happened around the same time is People's Kitchen Collective kind of came to be, along with Jocelyn Jackson and Sakit Kaval, who are my other two co-founders. And this sense of possibility, I just started kind of growing exponentially, not only in our collective work, but in my personal practice. And thinking about that responsibility, to address the last question of this responsibility to Asian American community, and also thinking about, again, the intersections. So what we've been really inspired by, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense Free Breakfast Program, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary this year. We just fed 650 people in Little Bobby Hutton Park on Saturday. And we were really honored to do that, along with Arena, who I had just happened to run into at the closing for AAWAA's reception, and then asked if there were volunteer opportunities, and came on in, and that's how this all works, right? Like all this beautiful movement work comes to be. And I think that this place to do the work, to this question of like why Asian American spaces and why female identified, women identified Asian American spaces are important, is it's a place to do the work, not only in that beautiful shorthand that we're able to have with each other, of like not having to explain ourselves, right? Of like when we experience something, we know, right? We've all gotten exotic word syndrome, we've all gotten whatever thing. But a place to do the work also in terms of the work that we need to do in addressing things like anti-Blackness, gender binaries, homophobia, colorism, and thinking about like how those issues still are alive and present, and how it's a place for us to do that difficult work in solidarity as ally with other groups, and to also recognize some of the privileges, especially East Asian American women, have had economically, in terms of job market, which are not, extended to, for instance, Southeast Asian women, and also just, in this shared struggle, there are things that we experience differently, and how can we be allied to each other in that work. We have hosted meals around Executive Order 9066. We've also held a seated meal in the streets of West Oakland at the intersection where Little Bobby Hutton was shot and killed by police 50 years ago last year. This is at the corner of 28th and Magnolia. He was killed by 1,500 bullets that were shot by OPD into that street corner. And this is another image from that meal. And those kinds of projects, these are this kind of like, it's as my work has in a way become more public, more out-facing, it's given me the opportunity in my own practice to also look inward and to ask some of those deeper questions that I think I've been really afraid to ask. And it's like so beautiful to see also the connections between the previous panel and thinking about, how is it that I got here? How is it that I came to be here as an artist? And so YB, I was in Bay Area Now 8 which closed this year at YBCA, and I had a project called the Archive of Dreams. I'm so excited to talk to the archivist. Yes, the Archive of Dreams. And thinking about, this idea of dreaming, of dreamers, of my parents both being first-generation immigrants, my mother coming to this country to study art, and what dream, means in all of these different ways. And so this kind of deep dive, in particular in this exhibition, has these, it's a mix of text and images, both photographs that I took with my mother more recently for the exhibition itself on the bottom, and then archival images from her when she first arrived to this country at the top, and then that's her on her wedding day on the right in color. To think about how now I can go really deep and what it is that makes it possible for me to start making those connections between, as Cynthia was saying, like these kind of the personal and the connection between these forces that are so much larger than ourselves. This is one of the images from that series that I made earlier last year, and this is actually the detention center, the luxury hotel turned internment camp that my grandfather was held at in Colombia, which is a very, very little known history, but he was detained there for the duration of the war. This is just another snippet from it. So in terms of thinking about, in terms of thinking about how all these pieces come together, this is actually a preliminary illustration that you guys get to peek at, which might change by the time the book comes out, but it's right now the first page of the book that I've been working on with Kaya Press. And thinking about this idea of genealogy and cycles and lineages and ecologies, and thinking about how all of these, how all of the people in our lives really shape our creativity. And I've been asking myself, okay, so what is my relationship to creativity? How has that changed over time? And I couldn't answer those questions, but the answers came when I started thinking about this. Who has your creativity been in relationship with? And so I started thinking about my mom. I started thinking about my dad. I started thinking about my high school art teacher. And in this consideration of all of these different relationships and thinking about this, I started to realize that there were actually these elements that emerged. That when I was a child, that I really was creating art. I had just the incredible privilege of creating art from a place of wonder. And that was because my mother was so creative in the way that she raised me, in the way that she, would, she like hung 2 hooks in the bedroom and threw a sheet over there, and I could go camping at night instead of just sleeping in my normal bed. And it moved on to really just in high school, just being incredibly isolated, incredibly just depressed, feeling very outside of everyone else. I think for all of the race, class, gender reasons, plus a little thrown in on the side. And it was Miss Hart, my high school art teacher, that was one of the people that literally walked out to the car when I refused to get out and said, come on, we gotta get you out of here. You can go someplace better than this. And so I realized that then I was creating art from a place of intuition. I was unconcerned with being critical. I was unconcerned with pleasure. I was just doing things because they needed to be done. And when I got to college, I realized like, oh my God, like my brain was right? Art can be about criticality. Art can be about connecting those personal ideas to larger issues in the world. But I started to get stuck, and I started to get frozen. And so if you think back to that image of my grandmothers and my mother, I started to get really good at identifying all of the reasons that I should not do something. You guys ever done this as artists? You sit there and you just come up with all the reasons you shouldn't do anything, right? And what really unstuck me was getting to a sense of belonging, which is what I heard the earlier panelists talk about, and I think that that's the place that organizations like AAWAA hold, is that in order to get unstuck, you need other people. You need your sisters, you need your people, right? And that, was really something that I felt actually when, not only coming to the Bay Area and being introduced to organizations like Kearney Street Workshops, which I was very involved with, still, special place in my heart, and seeing organizations like AAWAA, which I was just telling someone that I didn't actually participate in an AAWAA exhibition until like this year, which was a time, but I went to all of them. And then also coming into working with Sakib and Jocelyn as People's Kitchen Collective is the sense of belonging is really what allows, I think, me to feel safe in the work that I do, and it also makes me feel accountable. And that accountability is the challenge that I think that, all that I need for myself and that I want to see in work is how can we be accountable to each other in this work. And I think that to answer this kind of last question about like, what is my contribution? I have always been a bridge as a mixed Asian American. I have always been an intersection. And so I think that for me, my work is in the bridging and the intersecting. And I moved to the Bay Area 15 years ago, and AAWAA, we're celebrating 30 years. And I stand exactly in the center in between older and younger generations. And that is what I find so beautiful about this space, and why I kind of keep coming closer is because I see that AAWAA is engaging, right? Like this beautiful intergenerational connection, and how rare and how beautiful that is. So I think, in terms of like my responsibility to community, it's a responsibility to all of you, and your responsibility to all of me. And that's something that I want to engage, always in my work going forward, and how we can be that for each other. So I will end there. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, AAWAA, for inviting me to come and be on this panel, and thank you to all the other panelists that are so inspiring. So this is me, and this is how I started my work as an Asian American artist when I was very young. But you're right. It's like jamming through. Yeah. But that first picture there, as me as a small person, I just want to start there and just say my mom was from Hong Kong. She came when she was 7 and went through Angel Island Immigration Station. And I grew up pretty much in San Francisco, Chinatown. So this was actually a piece that I choreographed last year.
Oh, it's probably time slides or something.
We can undo. But anyway, I'll just say that for me, I use art as a tool for healing. And I'm interested in community arts and a grassroots perspective in trying to change things in a slow, small way, because I know that that's the way to actually make an impact. Are we good? Okay, cool. All right. Let's try it again. All right. So as a dancer, I ended up learning classical, Chinese, and folk. That's how I started off, and my identity is pretty much as a good daughter. So these are like the first costumes that I made, but it's like, that we call this cheesy wheezy. And this was actually inspired by interviewing Wong and her story growing up in Oakland, Chinatown. And also my mom's story about being here so young, coming with her dad and his other 2 wives, leaving my mom's mom home in Hong Kong. This work went on to be performed at Chen & Dancers and Mulberry Street Theater in New York, as well as several other places as well. But go ahead and click. Just the idea of what is it for young girls to feel empowered within the context of being a good daughter, and how does that work? Let's press play. So this is part of Noodle Women. It's hard to show live art with stills. So.
In Chinese families, over how they got here to this country, and what they story they had to tell, or lies they had to tell. I know that in my family, my father came with a paper name, so there's the humiliation of that, and nobody ever talked about it. And then there was investigations during McCarthyism. Nobody wanted to talk about that. a lot of hidden things that happen.
The notion of the underbelly of things, the things that are happening outside that, you know, we're hiding all the time, right? That's always been interesting to me. Oop, that's not me, that's my grandmother, can you believe it? She looks just like me, actually. That one. That one. Yeah, so, you know, so my dad's family is from Japan, and he was interned at the Gila River Reservation, starting when he was 12. Go ahead and click. And so those things that we don't talk about, right, those ghosts that are in the room are always haunting me. Go ahead and click away. And then actually this next piece that the first piece that I did for Asian American Dance Collective dance performances at that time was I think in 1991 or 1990. And this is me doing it much older, but it was back then, where I interviewed my father about his experience being in camp. And so there started the tool of the interview process so that I could start to ask people questions. And that was Theodore Artaud back then. And then I started working on Japanese plays, and I started working on dojoji and the whole notion that Kiyohime actually transformed into an eel. And so she's dancing, and all of a sudden her scales come out underneath her head. And then this was performed in Hong Kong and Japan and in other locations. It's very interesting how people react to that, depending on where you are. And so Asian American dance performances, I'm really proud to have been a part of that. It was originally founded in 1974 as Asian American Dance Collective. And you can click to the next one. And its mission was to support the diverse cultural heritages of Asian Americans through dance. And it was through the work like this, and also KSW and Asian American Theater Company, where we work together with other old, small Asian arts coalition building, you know, to try and create Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center. So one of those, but I still had a lot of anger issues. But in terms of responsibility, if you think about it, you know, I always felt like, you know, growing up, I thought that my life was influenced by 7 generations previous, and that my responsibility was going to influence 7 generations after me. But yes, I was dealing with how do I use art as a way to be sane, right? And this piece is actually the crane, the crane wife, and so just kind of feeling like being trapped. And how do you live as a woman during the day and then be a crane that's, you know, self-sacrificing at night. And then you can kind of see I'm working with kids here as well as elders, so go ahead and click. This was the kill scene, and that's Hiroko Tamano, Buto dancer. So in addition to the classical folk, I was also studying modern and jazz and ballet and Buto. So that's my day job, right? So here I am doing this. And so, maybe go back to the kiddos and the point shoes. So I was trying to figure out how can I work with kids to understand, okay, you could just stop. Just stop. I know, I'm sorry. Okay, so how do I work with kiddos to figure out being Asian American? Right, so I was doing a lot of projection work at that time, multimedia, and then why don't you go to that next little section where we paused? That one, go. I don't know if we had that picture of Yuri or we just bombed past it. Did we bomb past it? Yeah. Okay. So I had the great privilege of interviewing Yuri Kochiyama in 2011, and I think that really, is there sound? It really, I think, changed.
I have no
until then, I was
to
really.
What I'm supposed to say to youth from, disenfranchised populations. I have no. There's not a 1-step. There's not a 5-step. I don't even have a 12-step program for them. Like, I don't have any idea what it's going to take to give these kids a chance at life?
So I think, let's just stop it, because I think that you guys, if you want to see more video, you can come to the website and check it out. Oh, but I think, till this time, I think that I was dealing with my oppression, and I was dealing with my notions of like, how did historical oppression influence my personal life and my mom and my dad, and how my curating at Asian American dance performances was about discovering all of that, first through fifth generation, and like all of our demographic of Asian Americans. But it wasn't until I really met Yuri that I sort of like opened up and thought about systemic oppression and liberation theory in a different kind of way. And I would say that my work then shifted a little bit more, and I went back into the community, my community processes. This was actually with the AAWAA group at Soma Arts. Freedom, Circle of Sisterhood. So we'll just show some Girl Project stuff now. So I do my work, this is my shamanism stuff. So the way to stay sane, right? We have to figure out, sustainability is really about sustaining ourselves. Let's go. This is the Girl Project. This is the Girl Project at Eastside Cultural Center that now we are just about to go into our 7th year. So just as Cynthia Tom had pointed out earlier, go ahead and click to the next one. There are serious issues, sex trafficking issues. Okay, play. I think, maybe. So anyway, the program started in order to, oh, here we go! Have a safe space, feed people, give them tools. So I think the way that we can really support our young people is to be there for them. I have an open, you could turn up a little bit. I have an open office policy so that people know that whether they're 7 years old or 30 years old later, they can come back and still have a community, right? That's the great thing about community centers. All right, let's move on. Okay, so this is my Dance for Parkinson's program. So I've been teaching people with Parkinson's since 2007. And it happens every week on a Thursday, and it's completely free. It was in conjunction with the Mark Morris Dance Group in Brooklyn. Whoops. And I would have to say that both the Peace Project, the work with the Parkinson's dancers, and the work that I am doing now at Eastside with the Girl Project are things that came up to me. It wasn't like I had a brain idea and was like, oh, I think I'll work with kids who are at risk for sex trafficking. Or I think I will work with elders who are fighting their medication. And like, what does it mean for us to have a good palliative care system, right? So, but somehow the artwork was there, again, as a tool for healing. So let's keep going here. Oh, can I go back to that one picture? So, that one. That one. So that one you'll see, it's actually really interesting because we might not actually know, but people with Parkinson's actually take so many meds. So like that piece was about taking 21 pills a day. And then if you are taking Cinnamate, it's a protein blocker. So if you eat before you take your meds, then it'll block it. So I actually, you can just keep going, that's okay. I actually ended up compiling a book that we ended up taking with us you could stop right there. That we ended up taking with us to Japan. And so we made it half Japanese, and it meets in the middle in English on this side. But it's basically a collection of interviews with people with Parkinson's, wisdom about how to deal with the disease. And then also we included some neurologists and trying to figure out ways to share the information that we're gathering to the medical community. I mean, a lot of people who come to see this work who are in the medical field will say to me, I had no idea they were having such difficult time with their deep brain stimulator. I had no idea how many people are. Okay, so let's go to the end. That's the end. Yeah. So the end. So I just wanted to say, I do think self-care is the way that we can sustain. We have to figure out ways to reinvigorate ourselves so that we can be available to the community. So taking time out is good. Thank you.
Taking some time away, good idea. Because I've been like swamped with deadline, I had to rush here, and then so since I have some image but not too much, I'm going to pass around this book that I'm going to discuss. So thanks AAWAA and India for inviting me here. I know many of you. For those who don't know me, I'm Elizabeth Tripolo. I teach at San Francisco State University in Asian American Studies, my colleagues here. And I'm also the co-director of the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, DVAN. So when I was invited to come and speak here, I was asked to speak as an artist, but mostly as my current art, which is as a writer. I'm in a sabbatical right now to write my family stories. So that's I'm here to talk as a writer. So it's not too many images because I'm just sitting at my desk writing. But before this, I was with AAWAA. My connection with AAWAA is because I participated as a visual artist with AAWAA, I think 3 times with the Place of Our Own, and that experience really impacted me a great deal. To really, making space for my own art, and also the way that AAWAA view art as a form of healing. Right? So I take that in pretty deeply. And my second hat here is also, as I say, I co-direct this organization, the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, and one project I was thinking of discussing here today is this anthology of Southeast Asian women, literature and art that we produced a few years ago and is coming out in paperback in the spring. So this is the only text by a Southeast Asian woman available. It was published by University Press, Washington University Press. It was really a product of love because we were told, because it's called Troubling Borders, and we wanted to trouble borders also, but when you trouble borders, right, you face a lot of borders. So by Southeast Asia, we expanded the definition of Southeast Asia from a geopolitical space, right? Because when I take class in Southeast Asian studies, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotians, I say, well, that's framed because of the Vietnam War, right? That's why you have this category, but we also wanting to include other peoples, right? So we worked with geographic locations. So that's one, and I'm going to, I took note because I always worry to forget things. So I'm going to talk about, more specifically, about this project after I talk about myself. I'm going to talk about myself as an artist first. All right. And trying to stick to the questions. So I want to speak about myself as a writer because I really don't make enough space for that self of mine who wants to write. So I'm going to make a few minutes talking about this. The current project I'm writing right now is called My Mother's Castle. So it's about my mother and I. So I'm calling it a novel now because my mom doesn't want me to talk about her and doesn't want me to tell the story, doesn't want me to tell the truth. And she made sure that just in case I want to do so, she won't tell it to me and tell me all kind of stories. And each time I search, I find different stories. So I mean, this semester, right, the last few months, I've been researching my mother's stories, and it has been transformative because, you know, if you think of yourself, you know, thinking about the question, gender and race, if you think of yourself as a daughter of somebody who is middle class, really well educated, very traditional, a perfect, you know, woman, and versus being the daughter of somebody really struggling and poor and educated and desperate and maybe not so pure and traditional, then it impacts how you see yourself in the world. And so as I'm writing and I'm doing research about my mother and my families, I also check my own emotions and trying to write about it. So, you know, anger, wanting to like hurt back, to empathy and this having more empathy for my mother, have more empathy for myself to understand why I do what I do. So again, you know, as I'm in the middle of the process, I concurred with AAWAA, who's really have emphasized art as a form of healing. But I want to write the story just not to tell about my mother's stories. I have something more, you know, and I say what my points. And it cannot be about me, otherwise I cannot do it. It has to make a point, right? So how do we go from being a prisoner of race and gender roles to being empowered? You know, how do you go from being a victim or seeing oneself as a victim to an agent of your own life, right? How do you go from being unconscious to being more conscious? And what are the psychological costs of colonialization, racism, patriarchy, right? So this is the question I have in mind that as I'm telling the stories. I also want to think of making a novel instead of a memoir because I'm having fun to make stuff up. And since, you know, I'm realizing I'm not told the truth, so I say, okay, well, then they don't tell the truth, they make up stuff, I make up stuff, right? It's fair game. And also when things get too hard and, you know, because there's a lot of dark past, you know, part of my stories, I can lighten up with humor and, you know, something little fun for myself and my reader. Novel because I also want to blur the lines between the real, the daydream, the dreams, the fantasy, the inventions. And I'm not interested in revealing the dirt of my family or my dirt, right? It's nobody's business. But by adding more stories of immigrations from a mixed race perspective, Asian American woman perspective, into the narrative of these nations and blur certain borders, right? For example, you know, people often look at me thinking, oh, you know, French lady, right? And, you know, when I was a kid, you know, because I'm mixed, people saw more like Chinese girl, right? So that's how I was called, but not such a, you know, with the bad words. Or people think French or Vietnamese, but, you know, don't think that my imaginary is actually filled with images from Algeria, you know, because my father spent 26 years there and he's the one who taught. So just to finish this part about, you know, talking about me as a writer, trying to remember to make time for that part of myself, is a very long process, talking about having advice to younger people. I was talking to one of the writers in the collective last night, actually, and she had a baby, and she said, wait, how we do this? You know, here I am a professional, and here I am a mother, and here I am as a wife, and what about me as a writer? And she said, I want to quit and go to South America. And I said, no, you're not doing that. Maybe communicate. But is it something that I mean, here, if I speak about me, my mother is Vietnamese, I say, the background was not as privileged as she claims to be coming from. Her motivation was survival, not to be homeless. The fear of being homeless is passed on from her generations to me, right? So, art is not number one, although for me, for part of me, it's like food, but to have a salary, to have security has been number one. So I was reminded, these writers, that, from where we come from, she's also Vietnamese, and say, we can beat ourselves for wanting to make this a priority. This is really our legacy. But, please don't wait until you're in your mid-50s to give it to yourself, right? And then trying to say, maybe communicate to your partners, you don't need to sacrifice all for family and career. You can create some compromise, but without having going to South America, right? Okay, so that's that. So I'm going to turn to the anthology since I'm only 5 more minutes. And it's linked to the ideas of, making time for oneself and responsibility. As I say, I'm an aspiring writer, I publish a little bit, but a lot of my time is actually devoted to the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, which is a group that intends to bring writers together in order to break the invisibilities, to moving from the margin to the center. And we actually have a group of, thank you. We're having actually a group, an activity, a program titled She Was No Master, called She Was No Masters, and actually one of our members here, Wang Yuan, she's like, hey, and also part of AAWAA, we all have different hats. Here you are. So this group we form in Divan because the men's in our community is getting a lot of attention right now, but we also thought behind all those men there's some women who also want to write and doing really good work. So, and because we have so much pressure to be a family person, to have a career, right? And then also to be silent about certain things about the families, right? That are taboo to talk about. And if you talk about it, you don't only shame yourself, but the whole family and the extended family, and then the next generation and the past generation. Right? So it's very difficult to speak. So some of the so the person who's leading it is Daostrom, right? She's in Portland, and actually, while her and I are going to Vietnam this winter to share some of our stories and poetry. And one thing we've done, and maybe let's go with mentorships and with younger people here, is because around the Me Too movement, there's not too many voices from the woman, Asian American woman perspective, Vietnamese American woman perspective, but we've been so objectified and exoticized and hit on, and it's like, the highest rate of women being raped on campus are Asian American women, but nobody talks about that. So, but it's very hard to talk about, right? Also, as if you have undergone some of those violence. So we have got together, we've been inspired by AAWAA, Cynthia Tom is really kind of my mentor here. Let's get together and around certain difficult themes, write collective poems. And we have all our names, but it's not so clear who say what, so it gives us courage and strength to tell some, to address some of those themes and issues around gender and race and patriarchy. And the last, we just published after a poem, so we're really happy about that, and it provides a sense of sisterhood, and we get together by, coming together as a group of women is really help us produce our work, so I will encourage that. How much more time do I have? 2 minutes. Yeah, okay. So troubling border, that's what I'm here to talk about. So, as I say, troubling borders. So we troublemakers, we want to trouble borders. So one, by shifting the category of Southeast Asia, right, to include also Burmese, people, Brunei, Cambodian, East Timor, Indonesian, Laotian, Malaysian, Burmese, Filipino, Singaporeans, Thai, and Vietnamese, and other minorities. We also Okay, I'm going to go a little bit faster. Different kind of borders, gender, we including like a lot of queer perspective, right, gay perspective, thinking of what does it mean to be women, people of mixed race. We didn't look at, it was very difficult. Oh, you know what, I'm going to stay away from this since I have a few minutes. One thing that was very challenging in doing this, right, we say, oh, okay, well, we can do this. Well, yeah, right. One, we were told there's no money to do this project because one, you're changing the categories, two, the women don't write and they don't do art, and it doesn't exist. So if you don't exist, you don't have funding for something that doesn't exist, right? And we insisted on saying, no, it exists, right? But who are we to do this? We had no, one thing we wanted to do, we wanted to bring poetry and art together. But art, we say, we cannot be black and white, it has to be color, right? And color, the publisher, because we say we want to do university press, they say you have to pay $20,000. So we raise the money from the community by doing, like events like this, and little by little. But it was very, very challenging. Okay, my time is up. If you have any questions, I'll talk to you after, a Q&A. Okay.
Our next speaker is Cindy Chi.
Hi guys. Please excuse me, I get really nervous in these situations. I'm used to being in my studio hiding. So I have some slides. I only have 4 slides, so I'm just going to go through who I am as an artist. Also, thank you so much for inviting me to this and seeing all your faces and all these friends that I've had for many years. So it's a great group, and I'm really glad to be here. So first of all, I am a visual artist based in San Francisco. My studio's here, my practice is here, I live here. I sort of explore the intersection between East and West, my own materials in historical to present, also materials, exploring the materials that are old and new. You can see that in my work because I kind of chronicle the pieces that I'm showcasing just based on the kind of work that's been you could see the exploration of my own personal journey through understanding where my own gender and race and socioeconomic place falls into the political discussion today. And the first image that I have up is actually a painting that I did. This is one of my first paintings that I ever did. And this was a Chinese bride, and sort of the just waiting and anticipation for what's to come. And it came right after a personal event that was that kind of threw me in a tailspin. So it was my own kind of expression. So it was very realistic and very just visceral. And then next slide. So then it kind of went from there to looking into something greater, which was for my family and for me, mail order brides. So my aunt was brought here as mail order bride, and so I kind of did this this whole series around that as well. And this one's called Happily Ever After, and it sort of bridges the East and West perspective from each other's points of view, and then it comes together in a storybook. So it's a story in that way, and it's on a children's book called The Dragon Prince. Next slide. And this kind of goes into my latest series, which is kind of I've been inspired by fresco techniques, like from the Renaissance, and then coupling that with Song Dynasty literati traditions from the same time period. And I think for me, just the fact that we have access to so much material and information on the web, and understanding, all the history that led up to the time that we're living in now and with the place that we're in now, that I felt compelled to sort of incorporate that into the story that I know, and using those kinds of philosophies to represent what's happening in the world right now. So this is called Cultural Erasure, and basically it came about with the whole gentrification and the whole displacement of San Francisco, that feeling of things being torn down and regeneration. I use bees a lot in my work because for me it's a symbol of immigrants who kind of travel to opportunity, and then they create something of enormous value, and then they sort of get discarded as sort of these insignificant objects. So a lot of it is kind of tied to environmental concerns as well, but all of that is tied into my exploration of what it means to be an immigrant. And just, I'll get into that actually. But I am actually an immigrant myself. I grew up in LA, but I came here from Taiwan when I was 3, so I'm kind of like a half immigrant. And so I'm trying to understand how I kind of fit into this narrative and space based on that. Next slide. And so this goes into my latest series. I displayed that in Denver, Colorado. This is called The Promised Land. It's a view from the East Bay looking to San Francisco. And you can see, I don't know if you can see, but there's little railroad workers down there. This is to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of the Transatlantic Railroad. And I had a solo show in Denver, and I kind of wanted to show that history there because a lot of it wasn't being talked about in those kinds of places. And this was in a gallery space that was predominantly white, so I think this was a very, and it's actually Cynthia was the one who was like, make sure to show your face, make sure you have your image up there so they know, that this is an Asian woman. And I think that is really important as part of our practice as artists to represent and be a part of that discussion and have our faces be shown because it really inspires other people as well to be like, that's something I can do. So that's pretty much it for that. I wanted to end on that, but that's the part about me as an artist. And the questions that I found really interesting in this panel, starting with, does gender and race matter in the art space? And it absolutely does. One of the reasons I hesitated to become an artist, even though I've always been doing art, is because we were always kind of told that, like, your name doesn't belong in the art history books, or, like, I studied art history, I didn't see the Asian artists' names, I didn't see Asian American artists' names, and, we're kind of, like, conditioned to always have this goal, like, where do you want to be? What do you want to do as an artist? And to be honest, I had no idea. I don't plan on being in a museum, but that's kind of why it was so hard to start, because I felt like I didn't belong. So I have to credit AAWAA a lot for my kind of eventual reluctance to become an artist because in LA actually, which is, I grew up in an enclave with a lot of Asian people, but being an artist was for some reason not really an option. We had a terrible arts program. It wasn't I didn't know any Asian American artists, and it wasn't until I came to San Francisco that I discovered this whole rich, deep history of Asian American art and artists. And I feel almost envious of some of these artists that came from families that were so nurturing, and so they came from a legacy of artists, and I feel like they're much more ahead of me in this discussion, and I'm still learning. So I do think, though, that I've always grown up with the celebration of my heritage and race. My parents have always let me, they feed into me, you have to speak Chinese, you have to make sure that you understand your roots and all that. And I hated Chinese school, I hated doing any of that stuff. But I realized in America, especially at this time, it's become a huge, something that you really have to contend with. And I'm really glad that my parents kind of instilled that in me. But I guess in that way, it's the personal, even though as artists, I think we all want to just stay in our little bubble and do our own thing and be personal in our practice. But there is a reality that when people see you and they consume it, they see an Asian person, they see a Chinese person, they don't necessarily see you as an American, right? And this actually reminds me of something. I was with Lenore actually at Sonoma Arts for the Bernice Being exhibit opening, and there was a woman who kind of came up to me and started talking to me, and she sort of asked me about Bernice Being, and she knew that we were part of the same group of friends that knew her, and so they asked me like, oh, so was she trained here or in China? And I was kind of blown away because I thought, everyone knows who she is, but it really was kind of a alarm for me because I was like, hey, these, like, it's no fault of hers. She obviously, she didn't know, but, I told her, she grew up in Chinatown, so she grew up here. So I think we just always have to know that is something we're being asked all the time. And so I think we have a responsibility to arm ourselves with the knowledge and, learn from other movements that have already done a lot of work on our behalf. And especially from older generations of artists that have been doing the work. I think we have the responsibility to do because the reason I'm here is because of you guys, the work that you have done to make sure that we have a place in our history. And I think and I wanted to skip to advice for younger artists that want to start. I consider myself one of those people. I think going back to what we were saying about just this pressure of having to make it this thing, having to show at certain shows, be at galleries, make a bunch of money from it, that is way too much pressure to put on yourself. And it's really just, I think with creativity, when you start, it keeps cultivating itself. If the more you think about it and you don't do it, the less you have of it. And so the key is to just keep doing it day by day, and then it sort of will come. And that's sort of my story too, is I have this personal journey that you're kind of, my whole body of work is a personal journey of understanding where I fit in. And I feel like in doing it and sharing it with others, I see a lot of people kind of joining me in that journey, and seeing it's not only about race, but also just the universality of that experience of trying to piece together, what's happening with Black Lives Matter, what's the Latina movement doing, and trying to figure out the privileges that we have as East Asians and also artists to really keep the conversation relevant and forward. And I have to say, I failed 10 times, but I have to get up 11 times, to really understand my place and where my responsibility is in my work. But I think, my contribution still remains to be seen in that, and I hope that I could really take that responsibility and actually do it some justice. That's it.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you so much, Lydia. This is amazing. My name is Chelsea Ryoga Wong, and I like to give my full name so people know that I'm both Chinese and Japanese. And I'm a painter in San Francisco. I work and live in the Mission. And the first slide I wanted to start out with was this cropped image of one of my larger paintings, which just says unapologetically Asian. And I thought it was a good place to start because I feel like with thinking about being an Asian American artist and just an Asian American woman, we're always apologizing and we're always saying, I'm sorry, this happened, that happened. And I think that with my work, I don't want to apologize. So next slide, please. I do murals, and this is a mural that is in Compton, California. And it was for Serena Williams' resource center, which is called the Yetunde Price Resource Center, which was dedicated to her sister who died in a shootout. And I'm interested in community-based work. I'm interested in my own community. I'm interested in other people's communities, and I'm interested in just how those connections can build something beautiful. This is the larger piece, and with this project, I worked with Serena Williams' team, and we came up with a list of slogans that we thought would be very positive and inspiring for the people who come to this resource center. So I feel like it was a collaborative project. It's just my art visually, but I felt like the message behind it was meant to be inspiring, positive, and uplifting. Okay, so this is a mural that I did in Seattle, Washington, which is where I'm from originally. And I worked with about 40 high school students to paint this mural, and we actually did it in 3 hours, which is crazy. Start to finish in 3 hours, which is the most insane thing ever. But yeah, it was great to work with the high school students and get their, just soak up all their crazy energy. And then, so this is the mural. It was painted by the high school students, and then I told them I gotta paint certain parts of it, like the faces or the text, to make it look like it's my work. And that kind of happened. So it was a total collaborative project. And there's a lot of dogs in it because it's on the side of a doggy daycare. So recently I did a mural as part of the Artist in Residence program at Facebook. So this was actually in San Francisco, like their San Francisco campus. I think they have 1 million of them. But so it's kind of a mural that I wanted to make to celebrate San Francisco. The first panel on the left-hand side is supposed to be like a Chinatown scene where they're getting dim sum. And then the second little sliver panel is, it's supposed to be an ode to North Beach, and the lady's holding a book called Beat Poetry. And then the third one is a mariachi band in the Mission. And then the fourth panel is like supposed to be just a scene of everyday San Francisco life. And then these are the details. So these are just some of my paintings. I work in watercolor and gouache, and I work on paper. And they're supposed to be very joyful and optimistic, and sometimes they're also a little bit angry, and that's okay too. And I use text to just kind of express my mind. This is one about Chinatown. And they're supposed to be on a red carpet. It's called Red Carpet Dim Sum. I don't know if you guys can tell it's a red carpet, but it's supposed to be just kind of this fun thing. This one was about Lucas and the Mission. And this is inspired by the bakeries in the Mission. So I am, like I said earlier, I'm inspired by just not my community, but everybody's community and what I see. And then this is for a project in LA, which is about positive mental health. And then I just wanted to end this one here. I think it's, the words say joy, together, dance, overcome anything in harmony. And then in the corner it says laughter is contagious. Whoa. Okay, so Lydia posed some great questions to us, so I'll try to answer them a little bit as best as I can. She said, do gender and race matter in the art world? If so, how have you overcome these obstacles? And yes, absolutely they do matter. I think that I've always felt, as being an Asian American woman, that I'm at an advantage despite all odds. I feel like I've used this as a way to get my art out there and to kind of show the world, this is my message, this is who I am. Yeah, so I feel like I'm an unapologetic ambassador for myself. That was my note I wrote down. She said, what advice do we have to other people? And so I guess the best advice that I have to anybody starting out is just to be tenacious about your work, really carve out time for yourself, make decisions based on your own art practice. So I think for a lot of young people, it's like, you know, paying back student loans, debt, apartments. San Francisco is a hellacious place to live in many of those forms. And then to just think about, like, I have to make art every day. I have to make art every week. I have to make art every month. What does it mean to you? And to really just keep on making art, because I always tell people, you're never gonna be the best. You're never gonna be the best painter. The best painters sometimes don't paint anymore and they quit. So it's just about you putting your message out there and never quitting, if that's what it means to you. Okay, what other questions do I have here? It says, how do you view your contribution as an Asian American into the into the current racial and political discourse? So I think that it's important what we see, what images is important, imagery is important. So if you are going to a gallery and you see like a bunch of, I don't know, let's say paintings of white men, that's what you're gonna see. And what I try to do with my art is I try to celebrate diversity. So it's not just my diversity, age diversity, it's gender diversity, racial diversity, and so I do think that that's important, and I want people to see, let's say, kids around the world to see my art and say, okay, well, there's a picture of me there, and this is important. And then lastly, the question she said was, do you feel a responsibility to the broader Asian American community in the work that you do? And I think that this is a complicated question for me. I think I do because I'm Asian American, but I first and foremost feel like it's important to tell my story. And so for me, I come from a mixed family. My sisters are half black, half Japanese. And I think that the Asian American community is important for me, but I feel like all communities are important for me, and just to show that diversity. And that's it. Thanks so much, you guys.
So we have time for questions. Anybody wants to ask the questions to the panelists?
On Amazon. Yeah. And then it's coming up in the spring in paperback, so it'll be cheaper. Right? So you can teach it because it's affordable for teaching.
You can also order it at Eastwind.
Oh, you can? Oh, okay, Eastwind, yeah, so maybe it's better. Yeah, it is better.
Okay, I have a question for you. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So given that it's AAWAA's anniversary, I really appreciated what Cindy said about how important AAWAA was to you, and several of the panelists mentioned it, and I just wanted to turn that as a question if you wanted to talk about it more, what AAWAA has meant to you, if there were specific projects or things that AAWAA did that made a difference to you as an artist.
Thank you. I actually, one of my first shows was through AAWAA, and I didn't see myself as an artist at all. I think it took a long time for me to see myself as an artist, but the imposter syndrome, everyone has it. But AAWAA gave me the actual confidence, to look at all the artists here, and everyone's just creative. They didn't, set out doing these museum or gallery shows, but they have this responsibility to the community. And then I saw that, and I realized that I could do that too, right? It's not so much like I have to be a certain way or I have to do a certain kind of art. As long as I keep doing it and I insert, and AAWAA has given us a platform to be able to have that conversation on a larger scale, and that has really empowered me to keep going with it.
I just wanted to, I think a really beautiful thing I saw recently was through the AAWAA exhibition, the Agrariana exhibition. I was a juror, and I just saw the project in particular between Trisha Ong and Roselli Lano, who they collaborated to, for the opening, they brought sama-sama youth, Filipino youth performers, and had the video piece in the back. And just like, I got to kind of see from a different angle just two amazing women, super creative, who did not identify as artists also, like, just be like, I want to do this all the time. I want to be an artist. I want to do this. I want to do this, and I think that only happens in spaces like AAWAA, right? I mean, that in order to have both the opportunity, the platform, the resources, the larger community, the community support, that ecosystem that was mentioned before. And so that was really, really special to see, just like how that happened, how that blossomed.
And I have to say, this is one of the reasons I still stay in San Francisco is because of these kinds of organizations, because there is this care around the community that I just don't see in other places, LA and New York also. And I think that cultivating these spaces are really important because of those reasons.
Okay, I have a question for all of you. And After you listened each other, what elements do you find in common that resonate with you and say, well, that's exactly what I think, or not?
Between ours?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
I was so impressed by how much archive came up and how also personal, also not surprisingly personal narrative, because that is one of the things that we all share.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was really impressed by a lot of the work that the community work that you guys all do, and bridging communities together and all of that. I think we sort of lose sight of that in our studios sometimes when we just sort of hide out and do our own thing, and we just lose sight of where the work actually fits into the larger narrative, especially around the political landscape we see now, and where Asian Americans kind of fit into that political or racial narrative.
Yeah, does this work? It works, okay. I like the connection to just see how a lot of us have similar backgrounds, not exactly, but just as immigrants, Japanese American life, but also that everyone's just doing something totally different with their work, and I think that that's really interesting and wild and crazy and fun.
I think one thing we have in common, we all love AAWAA and the work that you guys do. Also, we all have to do our own practice. We're trying to make room for it, but also go out of our own self to give to communities in a different ways. Mm-hmm. And this is not to take for granted, and this is really, beautiful.
How do we get the younger generation involved? The younger people.
I think social media, that's one thing that I didn't say where if I were to give advice to somebody is to really just use social media as much as possible, because everybody has a smartphone these days and everyone's spending time looking at images on them, or at least a lot of young people are looking at Instagram. So I do think social media is really important, and just explaining what the program does.
Thank you so much.
I was just going to add that I think it's really important to provide spaces that are intergenerational, so that they have an opportunity to meet people who are doing it already. And also, I think elders learn something from kiddos, and kiddos learn stuff from elders. But, those I think are where you can actually bring in artists like Tomia or Tariq Lewis or other people who have been doing it for a really long time, and they meet, a kid will meet someone like that and say, oh my God, she's really badass. I want to do that too. I didn't even realize that I could do that.
Just one last thing about I actually really like that question, and I think part of it is also bringing the Asian American experience front and center, intersectionality with a lot of things that are being talked about right now, with Black Lives Matter, with all these other movements that are happening. We need to be a part of those discussions and really be and really get the younger people to understand why it's relevant to them. And Me Too as a movement as well, I think that's a very big one for us as well. I think we need to convince them why it matters. I came from tech as well, so having that bridge, it's really hard to get them to care, especially in San Francisco. And I've been trying, and I think part of it is trying to educate them on what we're doing here and why it matters to the broader discussions that are happening in the world.
Oh, I also want to add that letting young people curate shows is really important, because you're going to see a lot of fresh new art and blood and get involvement in that aspect. So sometimes flipping organizations upside down is really key.
And I think, to shout out Shifting Movements too, I thought that was a really beautiful example of that, that intergenerational connection and through that, actually, we were able, as People's Kitchen Collective, to connect with the Kochiyamas towards the meal that we did in the streets, you know, so they're not always the most direct and kind of visible connections, but they're happening constantly because of AAWAA.
I'm just thinking about that. I mean, one thing, as an educator, I see sometimes the younger people think, oh, I just want a career. Why do I have to go out of my way to create communities and help the other person, you know, next to me be an artist? And this awareness is consciousness, right? I mean, like from the 60s to my generation to your generation is different, and now is moving towards, you know, a different consciousness. And I mean, one thing you were saying, I mean, with the Diasporic Vietnamese Artists Network, actually, I'm really thinking, I want to retire, right? So, for example, like Katerina, who is here from also Diva, I'm thinking, oh, you know, let go of creation. Say, oh, what people like you in your 30s, you know, what it takes for them to go see poetry, right? What do they want to see? And why don't you, you know, we provide the structure, then bring the money, and then maybe you can come up with the creations that we cannot just hold on to that. Other people have to do it, and we also provide, writing retreats for emerging writers, and also want to think of online platform. That's another project we want to create, this online platform for writers to support each other, and for the established one who had no mentorship when they started, right? Vietnamese, right, it's a young populations, like 40 years ago, to also mentor the next generations, and how we can create those space. So online, let go, and providing resources for the younger people, but also for the younger people, like the consciousness, the awareness that, you know, what happened to you matters to me and is also beneficial if you are successful and I'm successful. So that's...
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
One more question?
Okay, please.
One more question.
Yeah, but have a bit of a preface to this question, because to kind of like gather us in the scope of like what I'm thinking about right now. And so something I noticed between the five of you is that you have paved your own way and like made your mark and said, I am an artist and here is the space that I want to occupy. But it's not egotistical, you know, it's very beautiful, and you also like bridge links to people outside of you. And with you, Chelsea, you said explicitly that you always put yourself at the forefront of your art because your story is really important. And I figure it's because no one else can tell it better than you. So I wonder, like, something that I'm personally tackling right now is how to embrace humility and also self-assurance and confidence all at the same time in this age of ego.
Hannah, I'm shook. Damn, girl.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I guess I'll start. I think that embracing humility is one of the best things that anybody can do, and also being a ruthless egomaniac. I think that when I look at, sometimes I watch these documentaries about success or whatever, and oftentimes I really think, you know, successful artists or successful musicians or this or that. And a lot of times when I realize, I'm like, that person was an insane egomaniac. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that if you're really passionate about what you do, to just sometimes say that I can take my space, certainly I can take my space to express myself, but also if other people are interested, they're going to provide me a platform for my work as well.
I think for me, you know, the work that we're doing and the work that we're talking about, we're really bearing witness to a lot of suffering. And, you know, with the work that we're doing and we're trying to transform that, that's what really, I think, in essence, continues to help me to remain humble, is those stories. And I think that's the same thing that'll take you down if you're not taking time to rest and rejuvenate. So I just wanted to point that out.
I thought of a piece that I did a while back, and I was like from a Confucian quote that was something like, I'm going to paraphrase, but is it through selfishness that you're able to, was she able to perfect herself? And I crossed out perfect, and I put protect as well. I think there's two sides of the same coin in some ways, because selfishness is a virtue by some means, but also can be used against you. So I struggle with this question a lot in my work. I think about it a lot because I was raised Buddhist. The ego thing has always been a problem, and I'm trying to like embrace that ego part of it, because I know that that's how you get your stories out there and how you get your work out there and seen. And I would say there's a certain level of humility that always occurs as an artist. You don't have to worry about that. I get slapped in the face sometimes with like people telling me, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm maybe performing an othering or something that, there's just so many interpretations, I think, that really it comes down to just being authentic to yourself and really being authentic to what you're thinking, and the way that they consume it, other people consume it, isn't really within your control. And so, as long as you keep doing the work, that's all that matters.
I think for me there's a distinction with identifying and being as clear as possible in every project that I enter into. What do I want for myself from the work, and who is the work for? And I think sometimes it varies. Sometimes who the work is for, it's for me, it's for myself and for my mother. My mother was really the center of the YBCA piece. Who the work was for on Saturday at Little Bobby Hutton Park was for the Panther alumni that were there in the park with us. And what I wanted for myself was a way to connect in to a history that, that I both am inspired by but stand outside of. And so I think that's over here, ego's over here, but it's that clarity, I think, that helps me. I think that clarity is necessary. And I think the other part of it that is talking to my elders, and it's something that I think has become a bigger and bigger part of both my time in my life and my practice. But in the book writing process, I was sitting with a friend, older friend of mine, and he was like, so what does the self mean if, and we're part of the same Sangha group, so if in Buddhist practice there is no self? And then we talked about that for like a couple hours, and then I've been asking that of other people, and so I think that that humility is like kind of built in when you start talking and sitting with folks who have a different and a deeper perspective and experience. And so that's been, I have a little route, go to Marcus Books, listening with folks, and it just, it's like, and it fills me up in a way, and I think also puts kind of plants the seeds of questions that I don't even know. It's not even not knowing the answers to the questions, it's like not knowing what questions to ask sometimes.
Maybe I just can bring it back. Yes, selfishness. I mean, often, last week somebody say, "Oh, artists are selfish." Just thinking about yourself. And also, as a writer, you just think about yourself. You don't think about how it's going to hurt other people if you tell those stories, right? And also, another layers is that, we're in the culture to say, "Oh, I'm so great," and say, "Oh, no, I'm not good," and people believe it. It's like, okay, no, okay, fine. So actually it's the opposite problem, right? You self-deprecate when you're supposed to, and then, so the issue is more the other way, to try to have more egos and make space for oneself. But, one thing I've been thinking about, in relation to this space here, you just have to imagine how this culture we are in will be with our storytellers, dancers, visual artists, cultural producers, right? It's that, right? It's like object. So for this culture to continue to live, to be alive, for us to be part of that culture, is not a selfish endeavor to tell your stories or express oneself. Is courageous, is brave, and is a necessity. Thank you.